Introduction, Other Kinds of Poor by K. Brad Barfield. If you've lived in Ashley County long enough, you know folks talk a lot about race and division, and for good reason. That story runs deep here, and it's not my aim to sweep any of that under the rug or pretend it doesn't matter. But there's another story that sits alongside it, one that sometimes gets less attention. The story of the white working poor, the families who, generation after generation, hain't quite made it out of the rut, even if a few kin have managed to get their heads above water. That's what this series is about, the poor whites of Ashley County. Not to compete with anybody else's story or rewrite history, but to lay out the facts and lived reality for another group that's seen its share of hard times. If you're reading this, there's a decent chance you've lived some of it yourself, or you've got family who has. Maybe you got land, but not much money. Maybe you're working steady, but still feel one step behind. There's all kinds of ways to be poor in Ashley County, and not all of them look the same from the outside. Some families have their wings, those who made it, those still struggling, and those that float somewhere in between. Sometimes, no matter how much you pull, you can't bring everybody with you. It's a complicated thing, and the longer you watch, the more you see. People rooted in place, house rich but cash poor, or working every day and still waiting on a break that doesn't come. This series is a realistic look at what poverty means for white working class folks in this part of the world. We'll break down the numbers, trace how it got this way, and, maybe most importantly, try to paint a picture of daily life that feels honest, not sugar-coated. There's no neat ending or single story here, but maybe in 7 essays, 8 with this introduction, we can get a little closer to what's real. Ashley County is full of stories, some loud, some quiet, all worth telling. Here's to seeing another side of what it means to be poor around here. Hope you enjoy the series. Foundations of Marginality, The Origins of the Poor White Class in Ashley County by K. Brad Barfield. To understand what it means to be poor and white in Ashley County, Arkansas, we must begin in the deep shadows of the antebellum South. Here, in the region's earliest days, a rigid social order was established, one that conferred the greatest privileges and wealth to the planter elite while relegating others, both black and white, to positions of profound disadvantage. The story of the poor white class is not an accident of circumstance, but a direct outcome of the systems that shaped the Delta and the Pines, land, labor, and the relentless logic of hierarchy. Long before the Civil War, Ashley County's economy was dominated by cotton, corn, and wheat, grown on land tilled by thousands of enslaved people. By 1860, nearly half the county's population was enslaved, their forced labor fueling the fortunes of a select few. The poor whites, small farmers, landless laborers, and backwoods settlers were left with little. Without slaves or substantial land, their labor held little value in a society where unpaid work was the norm and wealth was measured by acreage and human chattel. This economic structure created not just poverty, but a lasting sense of exclusion, as poor whites found themselves both part of the ruling race and apart from real power. After emancipation, the world did not suddenly open to the poor. Sharecropping and tenancy replaced outright bondage, entrapping both newly freed black families and poor whites in endless cycles of debt and dependence. The rich soil of the Delta yielded wealth, but it was siphoned upwards, leaving those who worked it with little more than hope, hunger, and the resilience to endure in a society that was never truly theirs. Socially, the poor whites were further divided by the powerful weapon of race. The Southern elite, wary of class solidarity, offered poor whites not economic uplift, but a psychological wage, the status of whiteness itself. This racial privilege was both a salve and a shackle, used to divide natural allies and keep the hierarchy intact. For generations, this bargain shaped not just politics and violence, but the very self-conception of poor white communities in Ashley County. In this crucible of labor and race, a distinct culture took root, one marked with stubborn autonomy, pride, and suspicion of outsiders. Pushed to the piney woods, the sand hills, and the edge of the Delta, the poor white class built a world defined not by riches, but by kinship, resilience, and the hard-earned lessons of survival in a society that was never truly theirs. Their story is foundational to understanding not just the past, but the present reality of poverty, pride, and struggle between the Delta and the Pine. Work, land, and industry, from cotton to timber, the Making of a Company Town, by K. Brad Barfield. The story of Ashley County in the 20th century is a tale of transformation, a shift from cotton fields and scattered farms to the vast pine forests that would define its destiny. At the heart of this change lies the rise of timber, the birth of Crossit, and the creation of a company town whose influence reached deep into every aspect of daily life. As the 19th century waned, the era of King Cotton was already fading. Mechanization and the collapse of the old plantation system left many rural families searching for new opportunities. The piney woods of western Ashley County offered such a promise. When northern investors arrived at the turn of the century, their ambitions were as immense as the forests themselves. In 1899, the Crossit Lumber Company was founded, quickly purchasing tens of thousands of acres and laying down the first tracks of what would become both a booming industry and a new town. Crossit was not an accidental settlement. It was engineered, built from scratch by and for the timber company. The sawmills were massive, drawing workers from miles around, men who felled trees, ran trains, and powered the relentless machinery that turned the forests into profit. For families who had lived on marginal land, the company town seemed to offer stability, steady wages, company houses, schools, a hospital, and the promise that hard work would be rewarded. Yet this stability came at a price. The company lumber company owned not only the land and the mills, but nearly every home, business, and utility. Company rules shaped daily life. What could be built, what could be sold, even where people could gather. The church went up before the saloon, and the bosses watched with careful eyes. In return, the town was kept clean, schools and hospitals were funded, and a sense of pride grew among workers who saw their labor transformed into the nation's lumber, paper, and progress. As the decades passed, the timber industry in its company town created both opportunity and dependence. Generations worked in the woods or the mills, passing skills, and sometimes grievances from father to son, mother to daughter. Women managed boarding houses, taught in schools, and ran stores, while men braved dangerous jobs in the forests and factories. The rhythms of life pulsed with the shift whistle, the logging train, and the ever-present scent of pine. But as the timber was cut and the land changed, so did Crossit and all of Ashley County. The promise of the company town became a double-edged sword. It brought jobs, community, and order, but also left the region vulnerable when markets faltered or corporate decisions turned against it. In the boom years, life in Crossit was full of hope and hustle. The smell of sawdust was a sign of progress. Yet the story of the company town would foreshadow both the strength and fragility that still shape Ashley County today. Gender, family, and daily survival, labor, care, and the patterns of rural life. The story of survival in Ashley County has always been a family affair, shaped by gender, tradition, and the unyielding demands of the land. Here, in the piney woods and sandy lone fields, work was not merely a job, but a way of life that bound men, women, and children to one another and to the rhythms of the seasons. From the earliest days, men's labor was defined by the heavy and the public, plowing, planting, chopping timber, herding cattle, and braving the hazards of the mills or the forest. The image of the hard-handed farmer, logger, or sawmill man is woven deep into Ashley County's mythos. These men rose before dawn, walking out into foggy fields or dew-soaked woods, tools in hand, often gone until the last light faded from the sky. Their work was grueling and often dangerous, but it was also a matter of pride, proof that a man could provide, endure, and protect. Women's work, though sometimes quieter, was every bit as essential. They managed the delicate economy of the home, growing gardens, canning vegetables, preserving fruit, tending chickens, milking cows, and cooking for large, hungry families. In between, they mended clothes, quilted, cared for the sick, and kept a sharp eye on children and kin. On wash day, women gathered at the creek or well, muscles aching from scrubbing, all the while trading stories and advice. In times of need, women took up the plow, chopped wood, or helped birth a calf, proving that survival demanded flexibility as much as tradition. Children, too, had their place. Boys fetched water, split kindling, and learned to hunt or fish from their fathers. Girls watched their mothers, copying every motion, shelling peas, stirring pots, rocking babies to sleep. School came when the fields or meals allowed, but work was the first teacher. Evenings brought the family together around the table or the fire, sharing simple meals and stories, weaving the fabric of kinship that made hardship bearable. Yet these roles were not fixed in stone. When death, sickness, or hard times came, the boundaries of gender and age dissolved. Widows ran farms, older children took up their father's chores, and neighbors banded together to help each other through. Women organized quilting bees, church suppers, and cannon circles, social rituals that doubled as mutual aid. Men gathered for barn raisins or to repair a neighbor's roof after a storm. Through it all, dignity was found not just in endurance, but in the small acts of care, the shared laughter, the prayers whispered over bread, and the knowledge that every hand, large or small, calloused or gentle, was needed. In Ashley County, family was never just blood. It was work shared, burdens divided, and hope carried together, season after season. Faith, culture, and community. Churches, kin, and the double-edged sword of independence. In Ashley County, faith and community were more than Sunday rituals or family ties. They were the architecture of daily life, the safety net when times grew hard, and the lens through which people saw the world. From the first settler cabins to the busy mill towns, the churches and kinfolk of the county formed the warp and weft of rural existence. Sunday mornings brought families in buggies and wagons down dusty roads, the day's best clothes pressed and ready. Churches, often built by the hands of those who worshiped within, anchored every town and crossroads. Whether Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal, or a dozen smaller sects, these houses of worship offered more than doctrine. They were places to sing, mourn, rejoice, organize, and sometimes find a hot meal or a warm quilt in the depths of winter. Faith was not separate from survival. In times of illness or loss, the congregation rallied, cooking meals, tending children, sharing what little they could. The church was where gossip met grace, where the news of a neighbor's misfortune was met with casseroles and prayers. Preachers were respected, but it was the widows, matriarchs, and choir leaders who quietly held the community together, teaching children, visiting the sick, and reminding everyone of their duty to one another. Kinship, too, was a bond as strong as steel. Families spread across farmsteads and hamlets, cousins married cousins, and neighbors became like siblings through work, hardship, and history. Names and reputations mattered. A helping hand offered in spring might be repaid years later after a storm flattened a barn or a fever swept through the holly. Mutual aid was not charity. It was the unwritten rule, a contract of survival that kept families afloat. Yet this culture of close ties and church fellowship came with its shadows. Independence and pride were virtues, but they could also breed suspicion of outsiders, resistance to change, and a stubborn reluctance to ask for help beyond one's circle. The same fierce loyalty that held the community together sometimes drew boundaries too sharp, dividing us from them, whether newcomers, distant relatives, or those whose faith or politics fell out of step. Still, in the face of poverty and uncertainty, it was faith and fellowship that sustained so many. Singing hymns beneath stained glass windows, sharing stories over fried chicken and sweet tea, gathering at the cemetery for a homegoing or at the table for revival supper, these rituals shaped lives, softened loss, and gave meaning to the daily struggle between the Delta and the Pines. Division and Uncommon Cause, Race, Class, and the Persistence of Division by K. Brad Barfield. In Ashley County, as across the rural South, the lines that divided people ran deep, lines of race, class, and hard experience, drawn and redrawn over generations. If poverty was a fact of life for many, its meaning was always shaped by the color of one's skin and the memory of who owned the land, the mill, or the ballot box. From the earliest days, the region's plantation economy carved a hierarchy that left both black and white poor at its base. Slavery and later sharecropping created cycles of back-breaking work and deprivation, trapping most families, no matter their background, in patterns of dependency and want. But the ruling elite, keen to protect their power, offered white laborers a bitter consolation, the psychological wage of race. Even when wages were low, housing poor, and choices few, poor whites were told they were better than their neighbors black. In turn, this bargain kept both groups from uniting against the systems that exploited them. The 20th century brought new work and some fresh hope as mills replaced plantations and timber replaced cotton. But even in Crossett's company town, the lines endured. Black workers faced the hardest, lowest paid, and most dangerous jobs. Segregation in housing, schools, and public life was enforced by law and custom. The company may have been king, but it maintained order by keeping its workers divided, knowing that unity could challenge its control. Still, there were moments at the edges of hardship or in the crucible of shared struggle when those lines blurred. During strikes or mill shutdowns, white and black workers sometimes stood together, demanding dignity and a fair wage. Yet these alliances were often fleeting, broken by outside pressure, the lure of racial privilege, or the old fears stoked by those in power. Over time, the divisions took on new forms, but never vanished. School integration, the Great Migration, and the slow march of civil rights brought change and opportunity, but also new resentments, new wounds. Today, the neighborhoods of Ashley County still bear the marks of that long history. Churches and schools and graveyards set apart. Stories and memories passed down about the line you didn't cross. To be poor in Ashley County, black or white, has meant bearing the brunt of economic change, health disparities, and limited opportunity. But for poor whites especially, there is the added burden of knowing both the privilege and the limits of their position, a constant tension between inherited advantage and lived hardship. The greatest tragedy may be not only poverty itself, but the lost potential of a common cause, the progress denied by walls built out of fear and pride. Until then, the story of division and uncommon cause continues to shape Ashley County as it has for generations.
The Anatomy of Modern Poverty, Education, Health, and the Hidden Realities of Life by K. Brad Barfield. Beneath the surface of Ashley County's proud landscapes lies a quieter struggle, one marked by persistent poverty, low educational attainment, and fragile health. While the sawmills may still run and the fields stretch green in the spring, the numbers and stories behind the census data tell a story of resilience under pressure and the quiet cost of being left behind. For many, the American dream of home ownership is real. More than 70% of Ashley County's families own their homes. But these homes, often inherited and modest, are not tickets to prosperity, with the median value far below state and national averages. House rich, cash poor describes much of the white working class. These anchors, cherished for their memory and security, can become weights in a region where opportunities are shrinking and mobility is limited. Education is another crossroads. Less than 13% of adults hold a bachelor's degree, and graduation rates lag behind the nation. For generations, necessity has pulled young people out of school and into work. First to the fields, then the mills, now to whatever jobs remain. Even today, school funding and achievement gaps persist, compounded by the lingering effects of segregation, chronic absenteeism, and the migration of talent to cities and out of state. The burden of poor health is felt in bodies and budgets. Life expectancy is lower here than the national average, while rates of obesity, disability, and chronic disease run high. For too many, the nearest doctor is miles away, insurance is out of reach, and health literacy is low. Families rely on one another, on churches, and on patchwork local services to fill the gaps left by government and a vanished company safety net. The old culture of self-reliance endures, but so do the silent costs of going without. Children shoulder much of the weight. Child poverty rates remain stubbornly high, nearly 1 in 3. These numbers mean skipped meals, missed checkups, and childhood shaped by want, worry, and sometimes shame. The stigma of poverty is compounded by the myth that hard work alone should be enough, even as structural changes, mechanization, plant closures, and global shifts have steadily drained away the rungs of the ladder. Yet for all its hardship, daily life in Ashley County is not defined by defeat. Family and faith, land and memory, and the pride of survival shape a quieter heroism. Neighbors still show up when fire strikes, meals appear on porches during sickness, and the small joys, school sports, church homecomings, a good garden shine through. But the reality remains. Without systemic change, without new investment and opportunity, the anatomy of modern poverty will persist, quietly shaping the fate of the next generation.
Paths Forward: Resilience, Resistance, and the Possibility of Change by K. Brad Barfield. If the history of Ashley County is one of hardship and hierarchy, it is also a history of endurance and adaptation. For all the obstacles placed in the path of its people, the story of the Delta and Pines is shaped just as much by what its residents have done to push back, to build anew, and to make something more from what they were given. Resilience is the quiet engine that has powered families through generations of change. When cotton collapsed, when timber faded, when the mills cut shifts or shut their doors, the people of Ashley County learned to hustle, to garden, to patch old cars, to take on any work that could be found. Churches and kinfolk filled in the gaps left by distant employers and government programs. The backyard garden, the home-cooked meal delivered to a neighbor in need, the tool borrowed and returned. These are the small, persistent acts that have always mattered more than grand pronouncements. But there is resistance here, too, a willingness to challenge the hand dealt. Local entrepreneurship has become a growing source of hope. From food trucks and auto repair shops to hair salons and craft businesses, new ventures have begun to carve out space in the local economy. Programs at the local college and work centers, microloans, and a Buy Local campaign offer the chance for residents to claim a stake in their own future, rather than waiting on a big company's next move. It is not easy, and the risks are real. But the rewards are not just material. They are about dignity, agency, and the pride of seeing a dream take shape. There are also stirrings of new solidarity. Churches, civic groups, and community leaders are working to bridge the old divides, inviting hard conversations about race, class, and opportunity, and looking for common ground in the challenges all working people face. Health initiatives, reading programs, and youth sports leagues are slowly stitching new threads of trust, even as the wounds of history still ache. Real change, though, will require more than resilience and good intentions. It will demand investment, better roads, schools, clinics, and support for small business. It will require the courage to reimagine what is possible, to reach across old lines, and to build coalitions that put the needs of people before the pride of tradition. Most of all, it will take the determination not just to survive, but to shape a future worthy of the grit and hope that have always defined life in Ashley County. The way forward is not certain, and the shadows of the past are long. But between the Delta and the Pines, hope is a stubborn thing. The next chapter is waiting to be written.